Man, I could just... Whoa, this is loud. Hold on. How's that? Are we looking good? We're super loud everywhere. All right, welcome to PrepperCon Radio. You're listening to AM 630. That's K-Talk. And we got a brand new mic over here. That's going to make it super quiet. Hold on. How about now? Nope. There we go. Okay, we're just going to keep the volume input low. We got a fun show today. Shane's here with me today as usual. Mr.
Good morning.
Retired guy.
Happy to be here.
So, you know what? We were just talking off air about the news.
Yes.
And second thought, let's go ahead and why don't you tell the listeners about that article?
That article? Okay. Let me pull it up on my phone here real quickly. I mentioned this to Scott mainly because this is some pretty important information. We focus on preparedness here, and my question is to your listeners, and I don't want to take a lot of time on this because we have a really great topic today that we need to discuss. But I wanted to bring this up briefly, is all of you raise your hands. How many of you feel that we're already in a recession? Now, this is my hand's raised, Scott raised his hand. This is obviously a very important topic, and we know that, without getting into details, we know that government manipulates numbers, they manipulate everything. So here's an article that came out on Zero Hedge this morning by Tyler Durden, which is not his real name, but
the real Tyler Durden was in Fight Club.
Yes, that's correct.
We don't talk about Fight Club. That's the first rule. Second rule, we don't talk about Fight Club.
That's right.
Much the same as prepping.
And so the theme of the government must be we don't talk about recession, right?
Must be.
So anyway, what I wanted to briefly mention here about this article is undeniable evidence that the real economy is already in recession. Now, those of us who pay attention, we already realize that, and it probably actually never came out of recession from the Great Recession of 2008, 9, so forth.
Okay,
that's been my belief. But anyway, this article goes on to essentially talk about freight shipping numbers. And let me get to this chart here. It's called the Cass Freight Index. The Cass Freight Index is, as far as we know, not manipulated. They're raw numbers. They're not seasonally adjusted. And essentially, it's showing that the undeniable evidence the real economy has been slowing down for more than a year, that these shipping index freight numbers have actually dropped from at the lowest since 2010.
He's gone.
So it takes into account railroad activity, and maybe some of you have seen these articles out there showing hundreds and hundreds of locomotives sitting out in the Nevada desert that are completely unused. Rail workers being laid off and so forth. So this is what I wanted to point out, is that the actual real numbers out there are telling us that we are in our economy is in a recession, if not, in my opinion, even depression, because of our doubly seasonally adjusted numbers that the government puts out. So jump on Zero Hedge, maybe go to Peter Schiff's news feed. He shared this article this morning. Read this article, very important, and I was captured the entire article, caught my attention all the way through, very important information.
Awesome. We talk about preparedness. That's the whole focus of the show. We want to talk about things that you can do, things that you shouldn't do, things that are going on in the world that help us to be a little more aware and awake in what's going on in the world. Our job... Wow, I didn't have my mic on again. The new system's driving me nuts. So one of the problems we have is as preppers is there's a lot of misinformation out there. And there's a lot of information that's just wrong. But then there's a lot of good information. The hard thing is to find the good information. The hard thing is to find the right sources. And so we're pretty lucky. We've got Cache Valley Prepper, who actually writes for Survivopedia. He's one of our really good friends, and he's actually joining us today for the show. Cache, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, thanks for being here. We're excited. We have a fun show today for you guys. We'd really love you to call in and kind of contribute to the content. That's why it's talk radio, so that you guys can talk, you guys can join in, and you guys can have fun with us. But we've got survival myths, food storage myths, preparedness myths,
Survival mistakes.
mistakes. That's kind of the focus we want to take today, because a lot of people, when they get started in preparedness, they'll read something and think, wow, that's got to be true. That's what I'm going to do. And then it throws them into this whirlwind of disaster.
If it's on the internet, it must be true, right?
Something like that, right? So we're going to have some fun with it today and just go for it. We've got a couple topics. I'm trying to find my notes here.
And callers, call in. We're still working with these mics. If we're a little soft, a little quiet, please let us know. If we're a little loud, we're doing our best here. We got a new setup with mics here, and we're trying to figure this out once again.
And every time they change it, we got to figure it out again.
Yes.
So these look really shiny and new and neat and wonderful.
They're very cool. No, they're very nice.
So,
So yeah, with these survival mistakes and survival myths, we're not mythbusters. It's not what we're attempting to do. We just want to educate you as to what you should do in a survival situation. And when I talk survival, it's not just wilderness survival. I think most of us obviously find ourselves in urban environments, city environments, more often than obviously a wilderness environment. And I think that's where the biggest, and Cash, correct me here, or what you think is when we don't think of a survival when we're in our everyday life traveling around the city, correct?
I think that's kind of a myth that's portrayed by survival reality TV. People get this dose from the media, and they just get in that paradigm of seeing it all as in the wilderness. And so I think there's, they can realize, take it out of context, that they'll be in it wherever they spend their time. And if that's in the city, that's in the city.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's maybe let's jump in right there. We're talking about these survival shows in particular, and what do you think? Should we throw out names? Should we throw names down in the dirt about who we don't like as it's a way of survival shows, and who you shouldn't be watching, or who you shouldn't be, or maybe not watching, because a lot of this is entertainment value, but and there is some good information in some of these shows, but there are a lot of one in particular who I don't believe has a show currently, and probably for some of these reasons that I'm sure we've heard all the myths, all the stories about where he would this particular star would be out in the wilderness, but then stay the night in the hotel, correct? And so my thinking on this is that a lot of these things you see on these shows, take them at the face value what they're worth, is that they're for entertainment value and not necessarily survival value, although there are a few out there who do teach true survival principles. Cash, what do you think? Which survival shows do you like to watch that actually portray good information?
Well, I try not to. Try not to be too critical, But I think some of the good ones, are most of the guys who have come out of Boss Inc., the West Coast Survival School, the Boulder, out of Boulder, Utah.
Okay.
So Boss, for those of you listening, Boss is the Boulder Outdoor Survival School. Awesome school. A couple of shows that have had some people on it. Matt Graham, who was on Dual Survivor, came out of the Boss program.
Okay.
One of my favorites, totally just spaced. Holy smokes.
Les Stroud.
Les Stroud, did he come out of Boss?
I don't know,
I don't
actually.
think he did.
I know he trained with David Holliday from Boss.
Oh, okay.
David
Cody
Holliday.
Lundin.
David Holliday, that's who
David
you're thinking of.
David
Okay.
Holliday. He is one of the funnest guys.
He's
and
the real deal.
he is the real deal. Another one that I really appreciate is Cody Lundin.
Yeah, he came out of there.
He's a tough dude. He's kind of abrasive, but I'd rather be talked to like I'm a little girl and I'm not paying attention. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's not very appropriate.
Came out wrong.
I should be talked to like a little dummy and namby-pamby. That way that's...
Right.
Yeah, I'd rather be
Talked
talked
down
like
to.
namby-pamby and told how to do something right and live than be given false information and die. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about him. I mean, and this is just the wilderness survival guys. I mean, there's also urban survival, and I think what we want to focus on is really more of the day-to-day dumb stuff that people think, hey, this is the right thing or that's the right thing. And in fact, we have a caller that actually his name is Bo. Let's bring him on the line. His question's directly in line with that. Hey, Bo, are you there?
Hey, this is a great show, and thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, hey, we're glad to
I've
have you.
sort of been involved. Well, I think we got to be sort of brain on when we talk about survivalism and preparedness movement in general. And I think that a lot of people tend to look at this as sort of a checklist mentality, and they don't start at the bottom of the pyramid with the mindset, and then the school set, and then the tool set. And to those people, I usually ask kind of rhetorical questions like, "Hey, what happens on the 73rd hour? Hey, how are you going to get? How are you going to? Are you going to stay? Are you going to go?" My whole goal with this movement in general is to avoid the living like a refugee. That's really it. Avoiding FEMA camps, like in the New Orleans. Avoiding the Red Cross at all costs, because I think that those things are actually detrimental and contraindicated to survival for the average person.
Well, you hit on an interesting point. Refugee camps, FEMA camps. Here's a scary statistic: is most refugee camps, the person's there 17 years. That's the average duration.
Wow.
And you're living in an 8x10 tent that has to be replaced every 2 years because the conditions are so poor, like the tents are so poorly made. So looking at that as a solution, or thinking that those are solutions right off the bat, power to you, but oh my gosh.
That's a big myth right there.
Crazy. Yeah, it's a huge myth. You're not going to survive well. You're not going to improve your quality of life. You're not going to thrive in any way. I think Bo's right on. You've got to go back to your pyramid that you said. I thought it was pretty profound.
What was that?
Your pyramid.
Your pyramid.
Mindset, skill set, tool set.
Mindset, skill set, tool set.
A real survivor. A person with the will and the skills to live. Can live with I don't go down a couple of rocks and some twine.
Right.
But you're not gonna. And then your average cube dweller could not live in a situation with all of the tools available.
Exactly. You have the right skill set.
With a backpack full of stuff.
Have the right mindset, the right skill set, the fewer tools that you need.
Well, forget the stuff. Focus on, first developing the right attitude, that will survive attitude. Think about the people that lived through, the Holocaust. How did they live? They lived because they had the right mindset first.
Absolutely.
And once you develop the will to survive, then develop some good skills. Regardless of where you see those skills fitting in business and in general, and in insurance in particular, they develop what they call a risk matrix. And I don't know how familiar you are, but along one axis of the matrix are probabilities, and along one axis or severity, and along the other axis you plot every possibility. For preparedness, for survival.
We're running into a break.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. We're running into a break. Do you want to hang on and come back with us after the break?
Certainly.
Awesome. Hey, guys, stay tuned. You're listening to K-Talk Radio. This is PrepperCon Radio on AM 630. We'll be right back after this. Hey, welcome back to PrepperCon Radio. Our volume is still low. We're trying to figure it out. We'll be right back. Hold on. There we go. Hey, you're listening to PrepperCon Radio. This hour is sponsored by our good friends over at Survival Medical. They're the only first aid kit designed for long-term storage. Find out more at survival-medical.com. And you can watch for them in Sam's Clubs. They're hitting Sam's Clubs next month all over Utah.
Yeah.
So, love those guys. Love everything they're doing. Right now, we're talking preparedness.
As always, as usual.
The usual. And we've got Bo on the line. We've also got Cache Valley Prepper on the line. And we just started talking about the myths, the mindsets, the biggest factor in survival. If you don't have your mind right, that's going to be your biggest stumbling block.
Absolutely.
So, Bo, you were talking about, and Shane talking about concentration camps, kind of the thing that set people apart or that helped them survive those things really is their mindset and their ability to think past their current situation. And I think that's one of the strongest things you can develop in preparedness is creating solutions as you're going, being creative, being a problem solver to get to the next step, to think, where am I going to be tomorrow? Where am I going to be in 5 years? And that's going to get you through anything that you're going to hit.
You know, one thing we talk about an awful lot is, in addition to the mindset, is counting on yourself and not counting on anyone else. So the myth out there that the government is going to take care of you, that all you have to do is call 911 or wait for, FEMA or whomever to come and rescue you from an emergency situation is, I think, one of the biggest myths out there. You need to be prepared to take care of yourself. Bo, did you have any other input?
Well, that's an interesting anecdote related to that. I was sitting in a church group meeting a couple years ago with all of the leadership from the local congregation, and I made that point regarding being self-sufficient in a disaster, and one of the leaders asked, well, how long do you plan to wait? How long do you plan to not get the government involved? I said, never. My goal for the whole congregation was that we could survive a short-term disaster with no involvement from the Red Cross and no involvement from FEMA, because when you involve the bureaucracy, you surrender control.
Absolutely great point. And also, I'm going to add to that the ability to, it's great to have a church that backs us, that it has food storage and that teaches and supports that. But also don't be too reliant on that either. Like you say, don't be reliant on the government, but also don't be too reliant on your church that when something happens, the church is going to be there to take care of you, because they're teaching us to take care of ourselves first of all.
Right. Well, that was also my point. My point was we come together as a congregation and not have to rely on outside help from,
Sounds like you got another call coming in.
Outside that congregation.
Absolutely. Well, Bo, thanks so much for your call. We
great
appreciate
call.
your
Thank
input.
Let's dig back into these other myths and survival mistakes and so forth here. Cash, what do you have for us next? What would be the next big myth or survival mistake you wanted to bring up?
Oh, I would say on the myth end, the fact that we can foresee disasters in the futures or emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
I think that mankind just has a lousy track record of predicting disastrous events.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Touching back on the risk management aspect, there's an author named Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote Anti-Fragile
mm-hmm.
and The Black Swan, and he noted that you can crack open any history book and it just reads as a list of events that we were unable to predict.
Yeah, now, a black swan, that is an interesting term. I assume many of our listeners know exactly what black swan means. Do you want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, it's just basically an event that damages us that we were unable to predict. And it comes from the etymology of science for thousands of years. I'm talking Roman era here,
mm-hmm.
Believed that there was no such thing as a black swan in the world until they got to Australia and discovered that there really were black swans.
Mm-hmm.
And so this just turned the whole, that term meant something that didn't exist, like a unicorn. And
mm-hmm.
then it became something that it took on a whole new meaning, which was something that was impossible to predict.
So these shows like Doomsday Preppers that portray a prepper preparing for a single event, that's kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, that show, they just portray survivalists as obsessed with a single event or a single threat to the exclusion of all others. And
mm-hmm.
I think it's key to their model.
Well, the fun thing is with PrepperCon, we've actually brought in some of those celebrities, and we've talked to them. And the feedback we get every time is the show says focus on this one event. And that's where everything's going to be built around for the entire show. Whereas the prepper themselves is like, I have like 30 different contingency plans. I'm worried about this, and this.
Right.
You know, it's not one thing, and I'm not freaking out about it, but they want me to act that way for the show. Because that's what gets ratings. At the end of the day, that's why getting all of your wisdom from TV is a failure on your part. You know, whoever thinks I'm going to learn everything I need to know about survival by watching TV, I'm sorry, but peace out right now.
And I'm going to go ahead and mention the name I didn't want to mention, Bear Grylls. He's very entertaining, and he's got a lot of skills. But when he shows you how to climb down into a box canyon, swim underneath a log jam, and then climb out of a vertical shaft in order to survive, I mean, all of that's just ridiculous and stupid when you're in a survival situation. And, Les Stroud, he completely, agrees with this, is that you don't put yourself in those types of situations. Sure, they're entertaining and fun for him to see him rappel down a vine into a cave and make his own fire and get through a cave to survive. That's just ridiculous.
And I think what we're trying to do today is really help people get a better grasp on what they can be doing that's correct, and dispel some of those myths that they hear a lot of times. I think Bo brought up a good point before we kind of changed to talk about mindset. He talked about the 73rd hour. A lot of people think, hey, I've got a 72-hour kit.
Right.
I'm good to go. Let's focus on that as huge myth number one, okay? 72-hour kit is a flaw in so many ways. Or
Agreed.
They'll say, I've got a bug-out bag. I'm good to go. I challenge everyone that has one of those bags to open it up and actually look to see what's in it, because I would say 9 out of 10 of you haven't opened it since the day you bought it. And if that's the case, your 72-hour kit is actually a 30-pound piece of garbage.
Yeah.
None of it's probably usable. I was looking at, and I'm going to point out a few people that I'm closely related to. One, when I got married, my wife, we pulled out her bag, and it was 5 years expired. And it was a great thing to have, but none of it worked anymore. And so I overhauled that, and I overhaul it every 6 months. And it's not a 72-hour kit. For us, it's a 96-hour kit, more of a stability kit to get you through the basics.
Yeah.
My additional kits, are scenario based. I've got medical gear in one area. If there's a trauma situation, go grab it. That's how I break up my supplies. But another one is I looked at my parents, and they had these really cool kits that they bought years ago. Again, everything was expired. Water expires. Hello. If it's not in the right container, it's going to leak, and that's what happened with theirs. Is it leaked? It ruined some other stuff. The batteries were all, dead, so their flashlights didn't work. They had one hand crank flashlight between the two of them, and then they had a hand crank radio, and the hand crank was broken, if I remember right. It might not have been them. It might have been somebody else's, but it was a lot of really good tools that didn't work right anymore. So you've got to make sure that whatever you have, number one, you know how to use it. So the 72-hour kits that you just go buy, I look at those as a really good starting point for an idea of what to
they
get.
can be.
I say go build your own from the ground up.
And
find the bag that fits you. Find the kind of bag that you can carry that's ergonomically correct for your torso. Go get fitted. Get a good quality bag, because that's going to be with you for a long time.
Absolutely.
I've been through probably 6 bags until I found the bag.
Figure out the right one. Yep. Kind of like holsters. Find the right one that works for you. And Cash, you've got some great views on this as well, right? The 72-hour kit myth.
This is, I try to focus, as opposed to focusing on survival, I try to focus on self-recovery, and that kind of shifts the paradigm from I'm waiting for someone to come rescue me to I'm going to fix it myself. And one of the ways you can do that is avoid what I call the break glass in case of emergency gear or kit, and use a working kit that you actually use on a daily basis.
I've got that too.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of us refer that to as our everyday carry stuff, our EDC stuff.
I think
exactly.
And I think there's more to it than just that. I think it's everyday use stuff.
Yep.
For example, like my 96-hour kit is my, okay, while I'm working on my other solutions, that's my security blanket, if you will, that, okay, I don't have to worry about going and, making anything special for food. I've got all the food rations I need to get me through the next 4 days while I solve these other problems. And that's really what I look at my kits for, is it's not a push-button solution. This just simplifies another aspect of my life. I love anything and everything passive that I can get to make my preparedness easier, like water filtration. Something happens and you don't have enough water, you've got to clean and filter your new water, right? I love gravity water filters. Anything that's going to take less work on my part so that I can focus on solutions like Cash, like what you're saying. You've got to triage the situation, be creative, and find solutions for what's happening so that you can just keep moving forward. And if I'm having to spend all my time and energy wasting calories pumping water through a filter, that's energy and time misspent, in my opinion. Same thing with fire. If I have to create fire and I don't have firewood, and I've got to go find firewood, and I've got to go find kindling, I've got to get all of the things together to be able to do that, that just wasted a lot of energy that I could have used fixing my house that's been toppled over into a sustainable shelter for a little while until I can fix the next problem. I would rather have those resources ready and know how to use them so that I can pretty much excel at, self-recovery.
Yeah, and one thing you hear from me a lot is not only being self-sufficient but self-reliant, in that if an emergency happens, you've already changed your lifestyle, your way of living to accommodate for that type of chaos or that type of craziness that could go on. You're already prepared for it in advance.
Oh yeah.
Okay, what next? What should we do next? Here's a good. Okay, here. I'll take the lead here. So,
okay.
A few simple ones, and I know what we've been talking about have been a little bit on the complicated side, a little bit on the advanced side for preppers and preparing. Water in particular. I know Scott was talking about water. Let's talk a little bit more about water. Boiling water. I think some people think that, okay, if I boil water for 10 minutes, it's going to be safe to drink. Just let it cool down, and I can drink it. Now, I think that is a very big myth. First of all, and there's a couple of parts to this myth. First of all, once water gets to a boiling temperature, you've pretty much killed all your microbes and stuff that can get you sick in the water. Am I correct, Cash?
Yes, and one tool you can use is called a WAPI, a water pasteurization index. It's just a little plastic capsule with a wax pellet that melts once the water has reached the pasteurization temperature, and that'll save a ton of wood.
Oh, very cool.
That's awesome. We got a caller that wants to talk a little bit more about water. Let's bring him on with us. Hey, Jason, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Tell me about the passive water filtration units. I know when we go hunting and we have to pump water, it's a half an hour, 40 minutes a day exercise, depending on how many people you have. It is slow.
Well, what Scott is talking about is gravity water filters in particular. And there are a lot of different brands out there. And in gravity water filter, it may be something like you've got a bag, you fill up the bag, you hang that from a tree, and let gravity flow that through the filtration system so that it fills up another bag or another container, so that while you're off, building a fire or dressing your deer or whatever you're doing, that it's filtering the water. You're not having to pump it. Gravity's doing it itself.
So, for example, I'll throw out a couple brands that have systems that do that. Berkey has a stackable water filter system that it's passive. It's gravity fed. You just fill the top bucket. It goes through the filters, fills the bottom bucket for you. Great. Yep. Not very good for transporting if you're going hiking, if you're going camping. Not the best solution. Life Straw's got one. You hang it from a tree, you fill it full of water, hang it from a tree, and it'll filter into the secondary containment. That's great. One of my favorites is Day One for camping and backpacking, because you can fill 2.5 gallons into the container, be hiking back, throw in a coagulant that actually takes all the debris out, but then also kills any bacteria. But then you go through a triple stage filter. That I think is one of the better ones for backpacking as far as a gravity fed. So when you're hunting, take 2 or 3 of those with you. couple people walk down to the river, the creek, fill it up, walk back to camp, hang it, and then you've got water on tap when you need it. And there's a lot of different solutions. I've even seen people make their own. I mean, there's Renovo clip-ins that you can use. There's a Sawyer filter you can use. Just
lots of different
create
ways,
a bladder, put your filter in line, and then create a spigot on the other end or another containment place to put your water and make sure it's going to stay contained.
And obviously, when you're backpacking, it can make more sense to have a really small, compact filter where you pump for your personal needs. For your
note, in Utah, you mentioned the Sawyer. I would just, pipe in with when you use the filters that have those ceramic tubules like the Sawyer. Just realize that if there's water inside those and it freezes, they will fracture and break.
That's a
so
great
you need
point.
to keep those inside your clothing once you use them if it's cold enough to freeze.
Exactly. Really, the only filter that can survive freezing is a ceramic filter. Even then, you still want
a ceramic porous filter without the tubules.
Exactly. Those types of. And it looks like we were coming up on a break here, real quick. So, essentially, water filtration obviously extremely important. Thank you for your call. I sure appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit more about it on the other side of the break. This hour is sponsored by Survival Medical, the only first aid kit designed for long-term storage. Find out more at survival-medical.com.
Welcome back. Okay, that didn't work.
Okay, it looks like, we've got some other technical issues here, so we're trying to figure that out. And again, this hour is sponsored by Survival Medical, the only first aid kit designed for long-term storage. Find out more at survival-medical.com. Okay, you back with us, Scott?
I think I'm back with us.
Oh, test it. Give it a try there.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah,
we're
we got
testing.
you there.
Okay.
There we go.
We're trying to figure out the mics. We've got 3 different cords going 3 different ways, and none of them seem to be the right one until you get to the last one. And third try is always the charm, right?
Yeah, we get different hosts in here that like things differently, and so they switch things up and make it fun for all of us. So, anyway, so back to the myths. We've got not very much time left, but a lot of stuff to cover. So, I guess back to the water real quick here. You don't have to boil your water for 10 minutes. That is definitely a myth that's been, I think, around for decades and decades. So boil it for a couple of minutes, but also boiling your water does not make it completely safe. Boiling your water will not remove chemicals and other contaminants or anything like that. So keep that in mind, that boiling your water alone will not make your water completely safe. But at least you won't get sick from amoebas or something like that.
The
right?
bacteria are less likely to get you, but you're not 100% protected in just boiled water. I think we need to talk. We've talked a lot about water. I think we need to go in and look at the rest of our list. I mean, there's so many things we could really do a full day show on this.
Absolutely.
There's so many myths out there. I mean, even just the simple wilderness survival myths of, I got bit by a snake.
Yeah.
Suck
What do you
the
do?
poison
Suck
out.
the poison.
Well, now you're
Right.
absorbing poison in your mouth. Good job. You know?
Yeah.
But I think more realistically is I think one of the biggest things people think of when they think of survival is food first.
Okay. Yep.
Huge myth. Every time I talk in groups, the first question people ask is, what kind of food storage do I need? Mm-hmm. And my response is, well, what kind of shelter do you have already?
Yep.
And they're like, well, what do you mean? I think one of the biggest myths is, and it's really not just a myth, it's just a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
People need to be focused on shelter situations. Shelter can be your clothes. Shelter can be your house. If your house topples, what is your backup? Can you put something together to take care of you? Give yourself shelter.
And here's a big aspect of that as well is with shelter, sure, I think the first thing you think is, okay, I need a roof over my head. But when you're out in actual wilderness survival, what's more important is insulating yourself from the ground.
Absolutely.
Is if you're laying on the cold ground but have a roof over your head, you're still going to freeze. You're going to be cold.
Well, even at your home, if you're living outside because your house is no longer safe and you've got to be in a tent, laying on the ground in your tent is the same as having no shelter because it's pulling the heat from your body while you sleep.
Now, if it's the summer and you need to cool down, that's probably a little bit better option to pull the heat out of your body that way.
Great.
But definitely in cooler weather, you need to focus on that bed. But also, as part of shelter, I think of shelter as really put a hat on my head, put on a nice Gore-Tex jacket that'll keep me dry and out of the weather. Wrap myself in a survival blanket. Cash, you have any comments?
That's very important. I would say clothing. People talk about EDC, they talk about their kits, but then they go out and dress for the daytime temperature. You know, especially here in the Rockies, it's very important to dress so that you can survive the coldest nighttime temperature. And up here in Cache Valley, one thing is we have cold sinks up here that it can be 60 to 70 degrees colder than the surrounding area. So choosing your camp site location is really important as well.
I think you bring up a really good point, is being prepared for the coldest temperature of the day. The tough thing in the Rockies, I mean, I grew up in Colorado, and the saying was, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same here.
Yep.
You know, the weather's always going to be unpredictable, and there's a chance it's going to change. I love when I see, you know, in my friends' cars, if I'm hopping a ride, I love when I see an extra pair of shoes or some boots, something a little more rugged than what they're wearing, an extra jacket, the different layers that you'll need throughout the day. I try to have that with me at all times, at the very least in my car, which is proximity really close to where I am at all times.
Yeah, and I know that this is, for me, is a big concern because I've hiked, say, Timpanogos quite a few times, and that's the first thing I notice is people, they dress for whatever time of day they left to go on the hike. So say if they left at noon, they don't have a jacket, they don't have hardly any water or anything like that. So as you go through this elevation change, which is about 4,000 to 5,000 vertical feet, the weather and the temperature changes wildly, and you can get on top and get caught in a storm, and then you're instantly in a survival situation. So just being on a day hike or on, say, an overnight trip does not mean that you're not going to get into a survival situation, a critical situation.
Exactly.
And you're not safe just because it's summer either. More people succumb to exposure during the summer because there are more people that are out enjoying the outdoors, and they're ill prepared for it.
Well, and they don't have the basics. It's funny how often you hear of so-and-so was rescued hiking Donut Falls. They got lost after dark, couldn't make their way back down.
All they had was a T-shirt.
Rescue teams up there getting them. They're in shorts and a T-shirt and flip-flops. Where's their flashlight? Where's their water? Why don't they have their cell phone? Because you've still got cell service there. Where are all the devices, and where's their common sense? So listeners, please practice common sense. If your kids are going to go off hiking, make sure they've got water. Make sure they've got a first aid kit. Make sure they have layers. In survival, the emergency rule of 3 is kind of for me, it's my favorite. Your first rule is how long you can survive without oxygen. Typically up to 3 minutes. After that, you start having brain damage issues, and oftentimes you're gone anyways. Thankfully, I haven't had to try to endure that emergency.
We need to practice.
The next one is shelter. Why is shelter so much more important than water or food, which are 3 and 4? It's because your body in a hypothermic state, you've got 3 hours, and you're gone. You need to have shelter. That's clothing. That's a tarp. That's something to get you out of the elements. When it drastically changes from warm to a cool evening, and you've only got shorts on, you're losing a lot of body heat really fast. You don't have to get wet to get hypothermia. Exposure is one of the number 1 killers, especially in the wild. So make sure your kids are following that emergency rule of 3. Make sure you're following that emergency rule of 3. Forget the myths that you got to worry about your food storage first and your food supply first. You can last a few weeks without food. And looking around the valley, there's a lot of us that could probably last longer, myself included. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to take care of the simple stuff first. Take your jacket. Take your cell phone. Take your flashlight. Have those things with you. Make those your everyday carry items.
And
we refer to them a lot of times as EDC, and you'll see that all over the web. Just search EDC, and you'll find everything from handguns, pocket knives, pens. Pens are so handy. Pen and paper. And always tell people where you're going. Make sure people know where you are and when you're going to be back, so that way if you don't show up on time, then they know it's time to start worrying or to at least check in on you. So shelter. That's so important. Make sure you've got a system in place whenever the kids go out, especially during the summer, because we forget how cold it'll get quickly at night or how the weather will change. If you're unprepared for rain and you're caught out in it, especially up on a hill in the mountains, and you don't have adequate cover, you're going to get cold real fast, and it might be more than 3 hours for you to get back to your car. So you got to think about that.
Also realize, if with the space blankets, it's very important to use those early on. A lot of people, they won't use the space blanket right away. And there are a lot of obstacles to using that, a lot of psychological obstacles. They don't want to admit that they're in an emergency. They don't want to break it out of the packaging because they won't get it back in. They're worried about the cost, whatever. Space blankets only reflect heat. They don't generate heat. So if you don't have any heat left to be reflected back, early on in the ordeal, you have much greater body heat to be reflected back than further in.
Well, I love that.
Absolutely.
If you just break glass, right? In case of emergency, break glass, break the plastic, open it up, it'll hold a little bit of heat, but it reflects a ton of heat, and that's the value in it. There's so many YouTube videos that I've watched that show how effective those are. One of the experiments was a wilderness survival show. Dual survivor Cody Lundeen, he actually used it as a reflective cover to take the campfire heat and bring it into their little. They had a clear plastic piece of tarping.
Right.
They adhered it to this little wall they found,
like a greenhouse,
and they made their own little greenhouse. And they put the Mylar blanket up against the roof at a pitch, and so it reflected that heat from the fire. So they actually got more warmth in there, and they were able to survive. It was like 30 degrees at night, and they were a nice 65 degrees all evening.
There are a couple different names for them. You can find them online, called the super shelter.
Yep.
But an easy way, you can, just in your pockets, it's very important to keep your core layer of emergency gear in your pockets as opposed to a pack, because packs get separated from you. They get set down when you rest. They get set down when you travel. They get left in the car, or you get ejected from a vehicle, a plane, a car, your ATV rolls over and pins you. You can't get to your stuff. If it's not in your pockets, you won't have it with you. Kind of like your firearm. You don't leave it home in your sock drawer. You keep it strapped to your body.
Exactly.
The safest place for my firearm is on me personally. It doesn't leave me until I'm laying down in bed at night.
Exactly. And you can easily carry the materials to make one of those with you. All you need, what I carry is I carry a polyback space blanket and a clear emergency poncho and some duct tape and cordage, and with that you can create that greenhouse shelter and reflect a great deal of heat back onto your backside, which is also helpful at night, because not only are you much warmer than outside the shelter because of the greenhouse effect and the reflected long wave heat inside, but you also have that heat reflected down on your backside, so you're not waking up every 20 minutes to turn over like a hot dog on the grill.
Which then, of course, takes us back to, like you were saying, being anti-fragile, and the only way to be anti-fragile is to be prepared. And to have that knowledge, that experience, and like you're saying, is like with that emergency blanket. If you don't, I'm not going to open this up because I can't get it back in the bag, and if once I use it once, I'm going to have to throw it away. I can't use it again. So unless you actually pull that out and practice with it and sacrifice a few space blankets, you won't know how to use those things, and you won't be prepared to use those when you really need to.
And they're $2.
Yeah,
you can get the cheapest one for around $2. I've seen them at Emergency Essentials for $1 on occasion. So try it out. Test out a few things. It goes back to what Bo said at the beginning of the show. Mindset, skill set, tool set. If you don't know how to use the tools, it doesn't matter, because you're never going to get to them, because you got to get through your skill set first. And the mindset is where it all starts.
And if your mind isn't clear, you're not going to remember your training. You're not going to remember your practice, and maybe not even how to use your your tools properly, how to start a fire and so forth.
Exactly. If your body's getting cold and you're not thinking to put your space blanket on, that Mylar blanket's not going to do any good in your pocket because you've passed that point in mindset where you're able to apply those skills and those thoughts to think rationally to take care of yourself.
And now we're almost out of time here. Is there anything else we want to cover real quickly? I wanted to mention tourniquets real quick. What about you, Cash?
That sounds good. Tourniquets are a good one. I carry. It's not going to be the highest rated Special Forces tactical tourniquet necessarily, but I carry a SWAT T, and the reason for that is because I can use it. It's multi-use. It does other things than just being a tourniquet, because tourniquets are one of the most easily improvised.
And I think the myth is with tourniquets is that don't use it because it's a last resort. And that's the myth, is it's not last resort. You should use it whenever there's uncontrollable bleeding, where you can't control very easily with direct pressure. So don't leave that tourniquet to the very last. Use it earlier. And this is something we learned from Jeff at Ready Man, that tourniquets can save your life. And obviously, with medical, you got to stop the bleeding first. You got to have the airway unrestricted. So we are at the end of the show. Thanks for joining us. We will see you again next week. And as usual, this hour is sponsored by Survival Medical, the only first aid kit designed for long-term storage. Find out more at survival-medical.com. And Cash, thanks for joining us. Sure appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
All right, we'll catch you guys next week. Stay tuned for Liberty Lineup.